Welcome to the MangaLove channel. Academic tutor Colby Hart is tasked with helping star athlete Ford Maddox pass a crucial algorithms exam. As Colby creates personalized methods to aid Ford's learning, an unexpected and deep romantic connection forms between them, blossoming once Ford achieves academic success and they solidify their relationship. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to MangaLove so you won't miss any of the newest stories. Now, let's dive right into today's story. Chapter 1. You're my what? The hallway outside the academic office smelled like lemon cleaner and old ambition. Colby Hart stood there, gripping his folder like it might save his life, the paper edges curling from how long he'd been waiting. The email had been clear: urgent reassignment, mandatory attendance, but it hadn't said why. He was halfway through rehearsing a polite way to ask when the office door opened and sunlight hit polished floors like stage lights. Someone tall ducked inside. Broad shoulders, dark hair still damp from a shower, duffel bag slung over one arm. The noise in the corridor dropped an octave when the new arrival smiled. That lazy, everyone's seen it smile, Colby recognized immediately from campus posters and the university sports homepage. Ford Maddox, star athlete, campus golden boy. Living, breathing reason Colby avoided gym electives. Ford's sunglasses pushed into his hair made him look even taller. Or maybe it was just the absurdity of him standing in a room that usually reeked of printer ink and anxiety. The secretary perked up. "Ah, Mr. Maddox, your academic support session. Perfect timing. Colby Hart, meet your new peer tutor." For a beat, no one moved. Colby blinked. "You're my what?" Ford grinned. "You're my what?" he echoed, his tone bright and teasing. Then he extended a hand, palm warm, confident. "You're Colby Hart, I was imagining. Less glasses." Colby cut in before he could regret it. Ford's grin deepened. "More cape, academic superhero." Colby's throat went dry. "Right, I left that at home." The secretary, oblivious to the social static now coloring the air, handed them both a form. Mr. Maddox must pass his algorithms midterm next month to remain eligible for the team. Colby, you've been assigned as his official tutor, 3 sessions per week minimum. Ford took the paper with a mock salute, then looked at Colby with a tilt of his head. That was too much. "Guess you're my new coach then." Amber and linen, clean, warm, steady, rose faintly from him. It mixed with the dusty sweetness of paper and Colby's own white tea and honey body mist. The blend made his pulse skip just once. He signed the form before his hands could betray the tremor running through them. They ended up in the library an hour later because apparently Ford didn't believe in scheduling before doing. Table 7 was Colby's favorite spot, quiet corner near a window streaked with the soft fingerprints of sunlight. Today it felt suddenly too small for both of them. Ford sprawled like the table was a couch, tapping a pencil against his notebook in a rhythm that made Colby's brain misfire. The athlete's forearms were dusted with faint white from gym chalk. He smelled freshly showered, still faintly sharp from whatever amber soap he used. "So," Ford said, leaning forward, "teach me about algorithms." Colby adjusted his glasses. "You're in the class, right?" Ford grinned. "Technically." The first 20 minutes were agony. Ford couldn't stop fidgeting, stretching, yawning, spinning the pencil. Colby tried to ignore it and focus on sorting examples, but it was like trying to read during an earthquake. Then Ford squinted at the worksheet. "Wait, this symbol's an O? I thought it was a 0. "It's big O notation," Colby said. "It measures complexity." Ford gave a slow whistle. "Complexity? Great, so I'm failing math and philosophy." Colby hid a smile behind his notes. "It's just efficiency." "Efficiency?" Ford repeated. "You make it sound romantic." Colby looked up sharply, flustered. "It's not romantic." "Relax, I'm kidding." But his grin lingered. "So what do I get if I pass this thing?" "An education," Colby said automatically. Ford leaned closer, elbows brushing the table. "I was thinking maybe a smile." Colby dropped his pen. It hit the floor with an unhelpfully loud clack. He ducked to grab it at the same time Ford did, and their hands collided under the table. Ford's fingers brushed his knee before closing around the pen. The touch was brief, accidental, electric. He passed it back wordlessly. Neither looked up for several seconds. By the time the clock near the front desk hit 5, they'd established two things. Ford could remember concepts if Colby turned them into diagrams, and Colby was absolutely, definitely in trouble. The sunlight angled through the windows, painting the desk in bands of gold and dust. Ford leaned over Colby's laptop as they reviewed the day's material. The glow caught in his hair, outlining him in soft amber. "You color-code your variables?" Ford asked, voice low. Colby's fingers paused on the keyboard. "I like seeing the pattern." "Maybe I need that," Ford said. He leaned closer to read, shoulder brushing Colby's. His body radiated warmth even through fabric. The faint scent of amber soap filled Colby's lungs until breathing felt optional. He tried to focus on his notes. Instead, he saw the small scar near Ford's knuckle, the one shaped like a tiny crescent. He wondered how he got it. "Basketball," Ford said, as if reading his mind. "Rim burn hurts less than grades." Colby blinked. "I didn't ask." Ford chuckled. "Didn't have to." He looked up then. Really looked. Those slate gray eyes glinting like they could see through every defense Colby ever built. The world seemed to shrink to the sound of a heartbeat. Colby's, probably. "Anyway," Ford said, finally pulling back, "thanks for helping me not drown in this. I owe you." "Don't thank me yet," Colby managed. "We're barely floating." Ford laughed, head tipping back. The sound filled the library corner, bright and reckless, and for a second, even the fluorescent lights seemed to warm. Outside, the quad glowed with that hour between afternoon and dusk when everything turned honey-colored. Students crossed the lawns in lazy clusters. Someone strummed a guitar near the fountain. They walked side by side, Ford juggling his duffel and a half-finished sports drink, Colby clutching his laptop like a shield. "So, 3 times a week?" Ford asked. Colby nodded. "Library or your dorm, wherever you can focus." Ford hummed. "Focus might be easier if my tutor didn't smell like tea." Colby stopped. "Excuse me?" Ford's grin tilted. "White tea, right? My sister drinks it. Makes her whole apartment smell calm." Colby's ears went hot. "I'll switch brands." "Don't," said quickly, too quickly, then softer. "It's nice." They reached the pathway that split toward the gym. Ford hesitated, shifting his weight like there was more he wanted to say. "For the record, I'm not dumb. I just find words move too fast sometimes." Colby looked up, studying the flicker in Ford's expression, the way his confidence wavered just long enough to reveal something real. He nodded. "Then we'll slow them down." Ford blinked. "That easy?" "It's just pattern recognition," Colby said, smiling faintly. "I like patterns." Ford exhaled a short laugh, relief hidden inside it. "Guess you're the right guy for the job." They lingered a second longer than needed. Then Colby adjusted his backpack strap and turned toward the dorms. "Hey, Hart," Ford called after him. Colby glanced back. Ford's grin softened into something quieter. "Thanks for not making me feel like a joke." Colby didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. The sun caught the edge of Ford's smile before he turned away, striding across the quad toward the gym. Amber and linen drifted faintly in the air, even after he was gone. Colby stood there for another minute, pulse still skipping, then whispered to no one, "You're welcome." He had no idea that a tutoring assignment was about to ruin, no, rewrite his entire semester. Chapter 2. Practice Makes Flustered. The gym smelled like sweat, varnished floors, and something else. Something sharper, cleaner, amber and linen. Colby sat high up on the bleachers with his laptop balanced on his knees, pretending to review the algorithm exercises he'd assigned for next session. In reality, he hadn't typed more than 3 lines in the last half hour. Ford Maddox was a distraction even when silent, but on the court, he was gravity itself. The team ran drills under harsh fluorescent lights. Sneakers squeaked, the ball thudded rhythmically, each bounce syncing to Colby's heart rate. Ford moved like the game was an extension of his body, fluid, efficient, almost hypnotic. His jersey clung to his back, darkened with sweat. The muscles beneath it flexed with every pivot. Colby adjusted his glasses and pretended to take notes, though the only data he was collecting was the number of consecutive three-pointers Ford nailed. 6, 7, 8. "Hey, genius," Ford called, grinning up at him. "You counting my shots or calculating my trajectory?" Caught. Colby looked down, flustered. "Just analyzing form." Ford dribbled once, then launched another perfect shot that swished through the net. He jogged toward the bleachers, wiping his forehead with the hem of his jersey. "You watching my form or my form?" Colby coughed into his sleeve. "You're impossible." "Not what Coach says," Ford teased, grabbing his water bottle. His voice was lower now, colored with amusement that made Colby's skin heat. "Come on, admit it, you're impressed." Colby hid behind his laptop screen. "I'm observing." Ford laughed. "Sure you are." The team finished practice, and Ford waved the others off, promising to lock up. Colby stayed seated, trying very hard not to think about how the gym lights caught in the beads of sweat sliding down Ford's neck. When the echo of sneakers faded, silence filled the space. Just the hum of the lights, the slow drip of water from a leaky pipe, and Ford's footsteps approaching. "Didn't think you'd actually show up to watch," Ford said, grabbing his duffel from the bench. His hair was damp again, sticking up at the back. "Most tutors bail after the first session." "You don't exactly make concentration easy," Colby muttered. Ford grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." By the time they left the court, Ford had showered. The faint smell of amber soap lingered beneath the sterile scent of hallway disinfectant. Colby trailed behind him through the narrow corridor that led toward the locker rooms, mentally rehearsing boundaries. You're his tutor, you are not thinking about the curve of his shoulders. Ford stopped suddenly near the metal bleacher ladder, turning back. His freshly laundered t-shirt clung to his chest, damp in places from where he'd toweled off. He braced one arm casually above Colby's head against the wall, not trapping him, just leaning close enough that Colby could feel the warmth radiating off him. "You're blushing," Ford said softly. Colby stiffened. "No, I'm just warm in here." "Uh-huh." Ford tilted his head, studying him like a problem to solve. "There's chalk on your cheek." Colby blinked. "What?" Before he could step back, Ford reached out and brushed his thumb across Colby's face. Slow, deliberate. The pad of his thumb dragged lightly along skin before he drew it away. Got it. The contact lingered in Colby's nerves long after it ended. He swallowed hard. Ford's voice dropped, playful, but hushed as if the moment had turned too fragile to joke about too loudly. "You make smart look dangerous, Hart." Colby's heart stuttered. That's not a real sentence." "Sure it is," Ford said, straightening with a grin that didn't quite mask the way his gaze softened. "Guess I'll see you tonight for study time." Colby nodded, eyes darting anywhere but at him. 7. 7, Ford echoed, already walking backward toward the exit, hand raised in a lazy wave. The echo of his footsteps stayed behind long after he was gone. Ford's dorm room was somehow both messy and charming. Half gym bag, half lived-in chaos. Posters of basketball legends covered one wall. A cracked mug filled with pens sat beside an unopened textbook. Colby had expected noise, but the room was quiet, except for the hum of Ford's computer fan. They sat at the desk together close enough for Colby to smell the faint traces of detergent on Ford's shirt. He booted up the study guide, scanning the first question. "All right," Colby said, clicking his pen. "Explain this algorithm out loud." Ford frowned. Okay. It's like..." He stopped reading again. Wait, that's not what it said before. It didn't change." "No, I mean..." Ford ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "The words, they mix around sometimes when I'm tired, like they're playing musical chairs." Colby glanced over. The annoyance in Ford's voice wasn't fake this time. His jaw was tight, eyes darting too quickly over the text. "Hey," Colby said quietly. "It's fine. Let's try something else." Ford looked ready to argue, but Colby gently slid the laptop closer. "Here." He opened a blank page and started sketching as he went. Forget the words for a minute. Follow the pattern. He took Ford's hand before he could think too hard about it, guiding his finger along each diagram line. This connects to that, you see? Ford's breathing slowed. Yeah, he murmured. That actually makes sense. Good, Colby said, relieved. His hands still rested over Ford's, and he realized belatedly how close they'd leaned toward each other. Their elbows touched, the heat of Ford's skin seeping through fabric. He tried to pull back. Ford didn't move. Their eyes met for one still, suspended moment. The hum of the computer seemed to fade. Colby's pulse throbbed painfully loud in his ears. He cleared his throat. We should highlight the key terms. Ford chuckled softly, the tension diffusing but not disappearing. Right, key terms. He looked down at the highlighted line, then up again. You're good at this, at teaching. Ford's gaze dipped to Colby's mouth for the briefest second before returning to his eyes. At this, Colby didn't trust his voice enough to ask what this meant. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. The air outside was cooler, the campus quiet except for the occasional laughter drifting from distant dorms. They walked together toward the parking lot, steps slow, unhurried. You're not bad at it, Colby said after a pause. You just need different methods. Ford smiled sideways. You sound like my coach. That's because learning is muscle memory too. Ford looked impressed. You think about everything, huh? I overthink everything, Colby corrected. That's a superpower. They reached the path that split towards Fordstorm. The breeze caught the edges of Colby's hoodie, carrying the faint scent of white tea and honey. Ford inhaled quietly, something soft crossing his face before he spoke. Hey, thanks, he said, for not treating me like I'm an idiot. Most people just give up. I don't give up easily, Colby said, smiling faintly. Ford stepped back, grin returning but gentler now. I noticed. He stuffed his hands into his pockets, rocking back on his heels. If I'm late again next time, you can bench me. You're not in my roster, Colby said, teasing before he realized how that sounded. Ford's grin whitened. Guess you'll have to draft me then. Colby groaned softly, shaking his head. You're exhausting. But effective, Ford said, taking a few steps backward toward his building. Night tutor, night student. He waited until Ford disappeared through the lobby doors before exhaling the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A minute later, his phone buzzed. Made it back. Don't grade me for typos. Colby smiled at the screen longer than necessary before typing back. Consider it extra credit for effort. No reply came immediately, but Colby could almost imagine Ford's grin from across campus, the same one that made his stomach twist in knots and his brain turn to static. The night air was cool and clean, amber and linen fading slowly into nothing. Colby tucked his hands into his pockets and started the long walk home, already wondering how on earth he was going to survive 3 sessions a week with Ford Maddox without combusting. Chapter 3. This is definitely not studying. The rain came hard and sudden, drumming against Colby's window in a rhythm too fast to keep up with. He'd been half asleep over his laptop, code glowing faintly on the screen when a knock rattled the dorm room door. He blinked at the clock. 10:47 p.m. Who even? Another knock, louder. When he opened the door, Ford Maddox stood in the hallway, soaked through from the storm. His hoodie clung to him like a second skin. Dark hair plastered across his forehead, drops sliding down the sharp line of his jaw. Hey, Ford said, voice half breathless, half sheepish. I forgot my umbrella and apparently my common sense. Colby's brain took a full 3 seconds to restart. You walked here in that? I had to return the notes. Ford lifted his backpack, dripping water onto the floor. And maybe borrow your brain again. Or towels, Colby muttered, stepping aside. You're gonna ruin my carpet. Ford grinned. You have carpet? Colby threw him the first towel he could grab from his closet. Ford caught it one-handed, rubbing it through his hair until it spiked up in damp chaos. The sight was unfair. Then Colby noticed the smudged glasses perched on Ford's face. His glasses. Ford saw him looking and smirked. You said I couldn't copy your notes. Didn't say I couldn't copy your look. Give me those. Colby crossed the space before he could think better of it, plucking the glasses from Ford's nose. "You'll stretch them." He started wiping them clean with the hem of his sleeve. Routine, automatic. But when he looked up, Ford was already watching him. Close. Really close. Water beaded along Ford's temple, sliding down the side of his neck. His pulse throbbed visibly there, steady but strong. The air between them buzzed faintly. Rain, warmth, something heavier. Colby swallowed, throat dry. "Here," he said. Ford didn't take the glasses right away. His gaze dropped briefly to Colby's mouth, to the small tremor at the corner of his fingers, and then back up. "Thanks," he said finally, slipping them on. His smile was softer than usual. "Didn't know superhero tutors made house calls." "Don't push it," Colby said, but it came out quiet. 15 minutes later, Ford had changed into one of Colby's spare shirts, an oversized gray one from freshman orientation. It hung loose over his frame, the sleeves tight around his biceps. The storm outside hummed through the window, rain streaking the glass. Colby sat cross-legged on the bed, while Ford sprawled in the desk chair, spinning it lazily between questions. "So," Ford said, "recursion versus iteration. Which one wins?" "They're not competing," Colby said, tapping his pencil against a notebook. "They're tools." Ford grinned. "Sounds like someone losing would say." "They're literally—" Colby stopped when Ford's chair spun to face him, close enough that his knees bumped the mattress. Ford leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees. "Come on, humor me. Which one's hotter, loops or calls?" Colby blanked. "Hotter?" "Yeah," Ford smirked, "if you were, like, into algorithms." Colby rolled his eyes, but he couldn't stop the laugh that broke out. "You're unbelievable." Ford's grin widened. "But you're laughing." "I'm laughing at you. Same thing." The storm filled the pause that followed. Rain against glass, the hum of the desk lamp, the faint sound of their breathing. Ford's eyes flicked to Colby's lips. "You've got rain on your lips," he said, voice low, almost uncertain. "What?" He took one step closer. "From when I came in." Colby froze as Ford reached up, thumb grazing the corner of his mouth. Barely a touch, more suggestion than contact. Then Ford leaned in, slow enough to stop if you wanted. Colby didn't want him to. The first kiss wasn't confident. It was testing, soft, hesitant. Ford's mouth was warm, tasting faintly of rain and spearmint. Colby inhaled the scent of amber and linen, familiar and dizzying. When Ford deepened the kiss, Colby's hand found the front of his hoodie and held on like gravity itself had shifted. The storm roared outside, but all Colby could hear was breath. The soft hitch when Ford's fingers brushed his waist, the quiet sigh when their lips parted only to find each other again. When Ford pulled back, his forehead rested against Colby's, both of them breathing hard. "Is this okay?" Ford whispered. Colby's answer was immediate. "Yes." They kissed again, slower this time, more sure. Ford's hand slid around Colby's back, palms warm, even through cotton. Colby's fingers tangled in the hem of Ford's hoodie, tugging it up just enough that skin met skin. Heat meeting heat. Restrained. Reverent. When they finally broke apart, Ford laughed softly, a sound like relief. "Next time," he said, voice rough, "I'll ask first." Colby smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "You just did." They sat in silence for a while after that, both of them pretending to study. The notes on Colby's laptop blurred into meaningless lines. Ford's thumb kept brushing the back of Colby's hand, an unconscious rhythm neither of them mentioned. When the rain slowed to a drizzle, Ford leaned back. "I think my brain's officially fried." "From recursion?" Ford's grin was lazy. "Definitely not recursion." Colby groaned, shoving him lightly. "You're impossible." Ford stood stretching, muscles shifting beneath the thin fabric of Colby's shirt. "You got snacks?" "Vending machine downstairs," Colby said, "if it's still open." "Let's find out." The hallway smelled like rain-soaked concrete and faint detergent. Ford walked beside him, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders brushing occasionally. At the end of the hall, the vending machine hummed in pale fluorescent light. Ford squinted at the choices. "You ever realize half of these aren't real food?" "They're fine." "Fine, huh?" He grinned, pressing a button. The machine whirred and a packet of honey wafers dropped with a clack. He turned to Colby, holding it up. For science? Colby's lips curved. You're not funny. Sure I am. Ford fished for coins, brushing his wet hand against Colby's when he handed him the change. The touch was deliberate this time, fingers slow to pull away. Hypothesis confirmed. Colby shook his head, cheeks warm. Your scientific method needs work. Ford tore the wrapper and held out a wafer. Try one. Colby hesitated, then bit the corner. The honey melted across his tongue, sweet and cloying. Ford smiled, watching him chew. Good. Too sweet, Colby said. Guess I'm more of a bittersweet guy anyway, Ford murmured, tossing the empty wrapper into the bin. They walked back in companionable silence, the tension softer now, threaded with humor and something gentler. At Colby's door, neither moved for a second. Ford shifted the strap of his backpack higher. Guess I should go before your RA catches your scandalous late-night guest. Colby smirked. You think you're scandalous? After tonight? Ford leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, eyes gleaming. Maybe a little. Colby opened the door, stepping aside. Get home safe. Ford nodded, but didn't leave immediately. His hand brushed against Colby's, then caught it briefly. Just a squeeze, firm and steady. No words, no secrets, just acknowledgement. Then he turned and walked down the hall, footsteps fading. Colby closed the door, leaning his back against it. His heart was still somewhere up in his throat. He was halfway into his bed when his phone buzzed. Ford Maddox, your rain tastes like honey. Colby stared at the screen for a long time, face burning so hard he buried it into his pillow. His heartbeat refused to slow. Outside, the storm had finally moved on, leaving only the steady drip of water from the eaves and the faint scent of amber and honey lingering in the room. Proof that the night had really happened, and that this definitely wasn't studying anymore. Chapter 4. Hands-on tutoring. Ford's dorm was quiet in the way buildings get after midnight. Sounds swallowed by drywall, light softened to the color of warm milk. Down the hall, someone's microwave hummed briefly and dinged. Then even that faded, leaving only the buzz of the exit sign and the faint rattle of an air vent that had given up, pretending to be subtle. Colby sat at Ford's desk with the laptop timer blinking red. 10 minutes. The timed mock he'd built so practice had been reasonable. Short passages, clear prompts, a couple of trick lines to force the underlying pattern. He'd explained the rules twice. He'd offered a practice run. Ford had insisted he wanted to try it for real. Now the timer hit 0. Ford dropped his pencil like it had burned him. I got 6, he said flatly. Out of 10. It's not, Colby started. Don't, Ford snapped too quickly. He shoved the paper away and scrubbed his hands over his face. I'm not stupid. I'm not. I just can't read fast like you. The words came out raw, as if they'd been pressed into him 100 times by a world that expected quick eyes and quicker sound bites. His posture turned into armor, shoulders squared, chin up, gaze daring Colby to flinch. Colby didn't. He folded the laptop closed with a soft click and spoke evenly, as if laying a blanket over a shivering animal. I know. Ford's laugh had no humor. Do you? Yes, Colby said. I looked up strategies that match how your brain works. Ford's eyes lifted, confusion cracking the anger. What? Colby slid a small pile onto the desk. A pack of translucent, colored overlays, a set of index cards with prompts broken into chunks, a page of hand-drawn flowcharts, and earbuds. Text-to-speech for long questions, colored overlays to reduce the letter noise. We read the prompt aloud first, then we map it with a diagram. Then we answer chunked prompts, not the whole paragraph at once. He tapped each item lightly, like naming ingredients. You are listening to a narrated story on the MangaLove channel. Don't forget to share your thoughts about today's story. We take speed off the pedestal and make accuracy the win. For a second, Ford didn't move. Then something in his shoulders loosened, the visible uncoiling of a spring. He sat, really sat, not perched or posed, and stared at the overlays like they were a magic trick. His voice, when it came, was small in a way Colby had never heard. You did all that for me? Colby tried for a shrug that didn't betray how hard his heart was beating. I like patterns. Ford's mouth pulled to one side. You actually care? Yes, Colby said simply. The space between them changed temperature. Ford's chair scraped as he stood. He came around the desk and stopped in front of Colby, close enough that Colby could see the tiny nick beneath his lower lip, a healing cut from some rough practice. Amber and linen curled through the still air. "Hey," Ford said, as if asking permission with a word he'd already said in a dozen other ways. When Colby's eyes lifted, Ford kissed him. It wasn't the shy testing of the rain-soft night. It was gratitude turned into gravity. His mouth was warm, sure, asking and answering in the same motion. Colby curled his hands into Ford's t-shirt out of reflex, then surrendered the fabric, letting them slide up, gentle but hungry, to Ford's jaw. Ford's fingers found the hinge of Colby's own, holding his face like it was precious and breakable, and he knew exactly how not to break it. They kissed again and again, Ford's breath sinking to Colby's, the rhythm they fell into, like hitting the same beat on different instruments. Somewhere in the middle of it, buttons gentled open under careful hands, cotton shifting, cool air skimming warm skin. Nothing rushed, no lines crossed. Without a nod, they both felt more than they said. Ford broke first, forehead pressing to Colby's, both of them smiling like idiots who just discovered a language the rest of the building didn't speak. "Good?" he asked, voice low and rough around the edges. "Perfect," Colby whispered. The words seemed to reverberate inside Ford. He exhaled a laugh and kissed the corner of Colby's mouth, then the line of his cheek, slow enough to memorize. Colby let his head tip back and said Ford's name, and Ford answered in his hair, like a promise. They didn't hurry the heat. It found them anyway, rising through touch that stayed safely over clothing, mapping muscle and tension and the tremble that ran through Colby's stomach when Ford's palm smoothed there. Hands learned what words had only circled, where to press, when to stop, how to ask without asking. "Tell me to stop if," Ford began. "I will," Colby said, and meant it. The knowledge of that made it easier not to. Eventually, they slowed, the kiss dissolving into breath and the soft drag of noses and the gentle reconnection of fabric to skin, buttons back where they belonged. It felt less like stepping away and more like stepping into something that would still be there when they wanted it again. Ford leaned back enough to see him. "Water." Colby nodded, suddenly aware that his lips were tingling and his pulse was in his fingertips. Ford moved around the small room, efficient without breaking the fragile spell. 2 bottles from a crate under the bed, a clean hoodie tossed toward Colby as if warmth could be thrown like a net. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the edge of the bed, hoodies on, sipping water like it was champagne after a win. "What helps you before exams?" Ford asked. Casual until you heard the care threaded into it. Colby made a face. "Random question." "Not random," Ford said. "I want to know." Colby toyed with a bottle cap. "Honey lozenges and rain videos on low volume." He glanced at Ford, bracing for the tease. Ford didn't tease. He grinned and bumped their shoulders. "Sound plan. Sensory aid plus white noise. Coach would approve." Colby stared at their knees lined up like even parentheses. "What helps you?" Ford thought. "I bounce a ball or pace until coach yells at me to sit down. Music sometimes, but if the lyrics are messy, my head gets messier." He paused. "And now, colored overlays and reading out loud." Colby looked at him, a warmth that wasn't heat unrolling in his chest. "We can add the ball and the pacing to algorithms, but you'll make me chase you with a whiteboard." "I'll run slow," Ford said, laughing into his water. The study lounge on Ford's floor had been abandoned to the night, a fishbowl of glass and soft couches that squeaked if you breathed too hard. They moved there because the desk felt too small for the reset Colby wanted. Under the dimmed fluorescence, he laid out the plan like a pre-game huddle. Text-to-speech cued, overlays fanned like transparent petals, prompts split into bite-sized cards with clean black handwriting. "Okay," Colby said. "Question 1. You read the question first out loud. Then you don't touch the answer choices until we diagram what it's asking." Ford nodded and slipped the earbuds in one ear. He read slowly and carefully. The last lines tangled, and he stopped, the old flinch twitching the corner of his mouth. "Pause," Colby said gently. He slid the teal overlay over the paragraph. The words softened behind color, less overwhelming. "Try again." Ford tried again. It was better. Not perfect, not meant to be. "Diagram," Colby said, already sketching boxes. He handed over the pen. "Your turn." Ford grimaced, then drew a box to an arrow to a decision to an outcome. Halfway through, his brow unfurrowed like a knot letting go. He finished, dropped the pen, and sat back. "Now answer," Colby said. Ford picked B. He watched Colby's face like a referee. Colby's grin broke before he could help it. "You nailed it," he said softly. Ford's eyes crinkled. The smile that spilled out of him was unguarded. No smirk, no performance. He looked like a kid who just found out the monster under the bed was a coat on a chair. "Again," he said. They did 2 more. The second required a read-aloud restart and a different overlay color. The third, Ford diagrammed before Colby finished his prompt, his tongue peeking out at the corner of his mouth in concentration. He chose D, then immediately second-guessed. "It could be C. Is it C?" "It's D," Colby said, "because of the constraint in the second sentence. Look at your arrow." Ford did. He huffed, amazed at himself. "It's D." "Yes," Colby said, glowing like he debugged the universe. He let himself bask a second in Ford's laugh, bright and unrehearsed. The kind of sound that made the lounge feel like a real place to live in, instead of a stop between obligations. "You see it," he added. "It's not about speed. It's about seeing it." Ford's answering look did something complicated to Colby. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They packed up a little after 1. The hallway was emptier, if possible, than before. A vending machine down the corridor gave a tired groan, the only sign of life. At the stairwell, Ford paused with his hand on the metal bar of the door. "Can we," he gestured vaguely, "walk a minute?" The stairwell smelled like concrete and old heat. Their footsteps clicked. They sat on the second landing, where a narrow window poured a slice of campus night onto the steps. Ford rested his elbows on his knees and stared into the square of sky like it might blink back. "The assistant coach said something dumb today," he said finally, in front of the guys. Colby waited. "Ballers who need babysitters don't make it past February," Ford quoted, voice flat. I laughed. I always laugh. It's easier to look like I don't care. Anger rose in Colby, clean and focused, the way it always did when he saw unfairness dressed in casual clothing. He reached across the space and found Ford's wrist warm under his fingers. He squeezed once, steady. "You're not a joke." Ford didn't look away from the window, but the muscle in his jaw moved. "You sure?" "Yes," Colby said. "I'm sure. Babysitters don't build tools, partners do." Ford's laugh startled out of him, quiet and grateful. He turned his hand, palm up, and Colby let their fingers slide together for 1 second that felt longer than it was. They sat there until the slice of sky got darker, until the hallway lights clicked their automatic blink. That meant they should sleep, or pretend to. They climbed the last set of stairs without talking. At Ford's door, the night folded back around them. "I should," Ford started. "Sleep," Colby finished, smiling because he knew the sentence and because maybe he wanted the last word to be something gentler. Ford caught the hem of Colby's hoodie the way he had the night before, not to pull him back, but to confirm the physics of them hadn't changed. "We're going to pass the exam," he said, like it was a vow. "We are," Colby agreed. Ford's eyes flicked to Colby's mouth, then up, then back again. He leaned in and kissed him once, soft, chaste enough to wear in public, and intimate enough to brand the inside of Colby's ribs. They didn't push, they didn't tip over the edge they both knew was there. This was not a night for that. It was a night for deciding to deserve it later. "Wait," Ford turned to his nightstand, rummaged, and came up with a small, crinkling bag. He pressed it into Colby's palm, closing his fingers around it. "Honey lozenges for luck." Colby's laugh was half-breath. "You bought these?" "Maybe," Ford said, bashful in a way that cracked Colby open. "You said they help." Colby tucked one into his hoodie pocket like a secret. "Thank you." They didn't say more. They didn't need to. Colby stepped backward into the hall, Ford's hand sliding off his sleeve with a final reluctant drag. The door clicked. The corridor swallowed sound again. On the way down the stairs, Colby rolled the lozenge in his fingers, feeling the little ridges in the wrapper. He thought of overlays and arrows and the way Ford's posture had changed when someone met him where he lived instead of where the world insisted he should be. He thought of the kiss like a thank you and the kiss like a promise to wait. He thought of the exam and of mornings and of mugs that didn't exist yet. Outside, the campus steps were cold and quiet. Colby sank onto the top one and let himself breathe until the air stopped catching on the edges of the night. He put the lozenge in his mouth, honey blooming slow and sweet, and closed his eyes. His phone buzzed before he reached his dorm. Set my alarm for 7. I'm not being late to our practice. Coach Hart would bench me. Colby smiled until his cheeks hurt. Be on time and I'll bring overlays and rain sounds. A beat. Then, deal. Also, I'm still not going all the way with you until after we pass this thing. Heat rushed into Colby's face that no night air could cool. He stared at the words, half joke, half line drawn with care, and felt something in him soften into certainty. Colby, good. Then I'll make sure we pass. He put his phone away and started walking, the honey resolving into something clean on his tongue, something that tasted like sweetness earned. Chapter 5. Final Exam. In Love. Morning unfolded like a held breath. Campus felt new-washed, edges sharpened by the kind of light that made even cracked pavement look intentional. The bell tower hadn't chimed yet, but the science building already hummed with nerves. Students clustered outside the exam hall in clumps, whispering, rustling, pretending. Colby stood a little off to the side with his backpack strap twisted around his hand, fingers worrying the canvas the way they always did before tests. He'd slept, technically. At least his eyes had closed, and the hours had moved. But all the dreams he could remember were diagrams turning into constellations, and a boy with amber and linen heat leaning over the pages, reading the prompts out loud like a cadence. Coach? He didn't need to look to know that voice. Still, he did, because he always would. Ford was already there, cutting through the crowd with his easy stride like he'd parted teams on a court and expected the same obedience from fate. He held 2 cups in a cardboard tray. Steam ghosted around them and made his hair look a shade darker where it curled at his temple. For your nerves, he said, handing one over. White tea, honey. You're impossible, Colby said, and took it like it was the only medicine that would work. The heat seeped into his palms. The lid smelled faintly of paper, but the breath rising from the drink was lush and soft. Effective, Ford corrected, grinning, then tilted his elbow toward the door. The crowd shuffled with fresh anxiety as an administrator taped a final notice to the wall. Walk me to the border? They moved together until the tide of test takers nudged them to the doors. The threshold was always the worst part, the way a doorway changes the weight of air. Colby reached into his hoodie pocket and found the familiar crinkle. He pulled out the honey lozenge he'd been saving since the stairwell and pressed it into Ford's palm, closing Ford's fingers around it carefully. Their hands fit like someone had intended it that way from the start. For luck, Colby said. For tradition, Ford answered and squeezed. Their fingers stayed where they were, wrapped in each other, an extra beat too long to be accidental and too short to satisfy. He leaned in close enough that his words brushed against skin, more than sound. Whatever happens, you're not your grade. Colby felt the sentence land like a steadying hand on his spine. He nodded. Whatever happens, you're not your eligibility. Ford's smile went slow. Deal. They didn't kiss. There were 100 people in 1,000 unspoken stories in that hallway, and some moments belonged to privacy. But when Ford finally stepped away and into the tide, he looked back once, and Colby felt the look like a tether. The door swallowed him. The hour after stretched. Colby found the ginkgo tree near the sciences quad, its fan-shaped leaves trembling like there was a tiny storm only they could feel. He sat on a low brick wall and watched sunlight drop through branches like coins. Every 10 minutes, he checked his phone to make sure it hadn't silently died or skipped or forgotten its purpose. Every 15 minutes, he ordered himself not to check again. He thought about the first chaotic library session, the smell of amber soap against paper dust. He thought of Ford breathless under fluorescent gym lights, warm and ridiculous and brilliant. He thought about colored overlays in a fishbowl lounge and the way understanding had broken across Ford's face like weather changing. He thought about stickers on mugs that didn't exist yet. He thought about how much of love might be inventing objects and rituals and then obeying them like a religion. When his phone buzzed, he nearly fumbled it. His thumb smudged the screen. The message glowed up at him. Passed, 78. I did it. A number, an anchor. The specific relief of a solid floor under the feet that had been kicking above nothing for a month. 78 didn't sing like an A, but in the language they'd learned together, it roared. It was diagrams and breath and time reclaimed from panic. It was a promise kept. Colby's eyes stung in a way that felt less like tears and more like pressure releasing. He typed something, deleted it, typed again. He settled on, "Of course you did, proud of you." He didn't have to hit send. By the time his finger hovered, a shout cut across the quad. He looked up. Ford was sprinting. The ridiculousness of him, even there. Backpack thumping, exam hall wristband dangling from his hand. Smile detonated across his face like confetti. He didn't slow down until the last second, scooped Colby off the wall and spun him once in a circle that made the world smear and come back into focus, brighter. 78, Ford laughed against his ear. Not pretty, but mine. It's beautiful, Colby said, and it was. And he didn't care if anyone heard him. Something in the spin softened into stillness. Ford set him down, but didn't step back far. Went just enough that he could press a kiss to Colby's temple, quick and sure, public enough to be a declaration instead of a secret. A few people nearby pretended to look away. Someone whooped. Someone else clapped, the sound absurdly formal. Ford didn't care. He looked happy in a way that clung to bone. He looked like a boy who'd carried a weight for so long, he forgot he could put it down and had just done it in front of everyone. "Dinner?" he said, breathless. "Tonight, I'm taking you up." Up? He tilted his head toward the humanities building, where a stairwell led to a rooftop everyone pretended not to know was open. "I bribed my teammate with midnight ramen to borrow his string lights." "You planned a date?" Ford's grin warmed at the edges. "I plan to win, dates included." The city waited for them to arrive. In the meantime, day bled into evening, and Colby went home to shower, to stand for too long underwater that pretended to be rain and then remembered it wasn't, to put on a different hoodie and pretend it wasn't because Ford liked this one better. He tried on 3 shirts before realizing the one he started with felt most like himself. When he reached the humanities rooftop, the door opened to a breath of warm air and the soft spatter of bulbs against the early dark. The string lights zigzagged in gentle arcs between 2 rusting vent stacks, turning the concrete warm and the sky close. A blanket lay on the ground like a small country. Takeout cartons sat in a proud stack beside it. Dumplings, noodles, something suspiciously labeled spicy, something we promised was only medium. Ford stood there with his hands shoved in his pockets and his shoulders wider than a boy's usually are when he's trying to look casual. He'd changed into a clean tee and pulled a camp shirt over it, unbuttoned as if he'd started to dress up, and then remembered that what Colby liked best was unperformed. "Hi," he said, like the word could be as big as the night. "Hi," Colby answered, equally useless. They ate first, because sometimes the most sacred thing 2 people can do is leave the holy for later. They traded chopsticks when Ford couldn't catch a noodle to save his life. They discovered dumplings taste better when stolen. They learned that Colby's tolerance for spice is a comedy routine, and that Ford insists water makes heat worse. In the background, the campus twined around itself, and beyond that, the city sighed like it had just put on something comfortable. Only when cartons lay tilted open and the blanket had adopted them did Ford settle back on his palms and squint up at the strings he'd hung with the patience he usually reserved for free-throw rituals. "I was going to say," he began, voice quieter, "my first crush was on confidence, you know? Like the idea of walking into a room and owning it." He gestured vaguely at his own chest, at 1,000 game nights. But it turns out, confidence looked like a boy who color codes chaos and breathes before he explains and thinks, "I'm not broken just because I don't read the way a room wants me to." Colby stared at the blanket, and then at the lace of white bulbs, and then at the boy in front of him, and all three looked like constellations someone had thoughtfully arranged. His cheeks went warm. "I like the way you read out loud now," he said, surprising himself with how true it sounded. "It's steady." Ford's mouth tipped into something soft. "Steady," he repeated. "I want that." "You have it," Colby said. They moved together without deciding to. It wasn't a dramatic lunge or a slow-motion lean. It was an orbit tightening, a gravity obeyed. When their lips met, the city didn't disappear. It hummed politely below them as if to say, "We'll be here when you return." The kiss was slow enough to taste, sure enough to be memorized, unhurried in the way of people who already know what the ending will be and are choosing to live through the middle carefully. Hands settled like they'd been trained, at the line of a cheek, on the curve of a waist, at the slope of a shoulder. There was no rush to untie, no cleverness required, no test to pass. The air was warm, the ground was steady, and the string lights made a small galaxy where two people could keep finding the same star. They talked between kisses the way you do when language and touch want to be neighbors. Ford said, "I kept the overlay," and Colby laughed into his mouth. Colby said, "You spin when you're thinking," and Ford kissed that smile like a yes. Ford said, "We did this," and Colby whispered, "We." Eventually, the chill crept up, not quite summer concrete, and questioned their plans. Ford packed cartons with the kind of efficiency he never applied to his backpack. Colby folded the blanket slowly. A ritual spun out to hold something that didn't need holding. They walked back under a sky that didn't mind them, and a campus that did what campuses do, curated intimacy by pretending not to notice. In Colby's room, light gathered along the windowsill like it had been there all day waiting for them. The door clicked behind them, and the smallness of the space felt like a kindness. The overhead bulb stayed dark. The desk lamp made a circle of gold on the floor. They stood there, suddenly shy with their own certainty. "Hey," Ford said. The word had done so much work for them. It did more now. Colby stepped in. The first kiss in the room was not like the rooftop, and not like rain. It was both, and neither. It had the electricity of discovery and the ease of repetition. When cloth found chairbacks, it did so neatly, folded without ceremony, because reverence can look like order. Fingers learned again how to ask. Mouths learned again how to answer. There were pauses for breath and for laughter when elbows bumped, and for silence when they didn't want anything except to listen to a heartbeat. Somewhere, a sentence bent into poetry. Somewhere, the diagram of a month redrew itself with a cleaner line. Somewhere between the first kiss and the last whisper, studying turned sacred. The camera door closed on the window glow, and the two silhouettes leaning close. The city kept humming whether or not anyone noticed. Night took the weight it was given and woke because of it, not despite. Morning happened the way it always does, on a schedule, indifferent to romance, and somehow perfect for it. Light climbed the dorm wall in a patient rectangle. Colby was the first to open his eyes. He lay there with someone else's arm heavy at his waist. The inhale-exhale of sleep warming the back of his neck, and he let himself think. We. The thought did not scare him. It felt like stepping into a hoodie you've worn long enough to count as skin. He turned carefully. Ford was face down on the pillow like gravity had told him a story, and he believed all of it. His hair was a mess. There was a crease on his cheek from the seam. Colby reached up and smoothed it instinctively, then stopped himself, because there is a holiness to mornings you don't ruin with too much precision. When Ford finally stirred, it was with a sound that lived somewhere between a groan and a word. He blinked, then smiled without moving his mouth much, as if the expression had started behind his eyes and pushed outward. "Hey," he said, because of course. "Hey," Colby whispered back, because always. They didn't rush up. They lay there in the warmth they had manufactured and listened to the building announce itself. The door down the hall, the shower 2 floors up, the mail cart squeak that could make a fortune if it sued whoever designed it. On the desk, 2 mugs waited, labels drying. One read Coach, the other read Tutor. They had lettered them last night with a Sharpie Ford found in the pencil cup, the way you name stars you intend to keep. "Guess I passed your class," Ford said into the pillow, smile audible. Colby leaned over him and kissed the smile and the crease, both because both were real. "Barely," he said against Ford's skin. "You still need extra credit." "Can I make it up now?" "Office hours," Colby said, and Ford snorted. They rose eventually. They did not rush. They found jeans where they'd been folded and shirts where they'd draped them, and laughed softly when they both reached for the same hoodie and then decided to share it anyway, for a minute. Ridiculous. Shoulders squeezed together. A 2-headed creature who couldn't pour coffee without chaos. White tea steamed in one mug, black coffee in the other. Pencils stood in their cup like flowers that forgot to water. On the sill, a packet of honey wafers leaned against the glass. And outside, the thin traffic of a campus morning was tidied by amber and linen, braided with white tea and honey in the quiet air. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. There was a test behind them, 100,000 before them, and 2 people who had learned how to walk through doors with hands that knew where to find each other. Colby took a sip of tea and waited for the warmth to reach his fingers. Ford wrapped an arm around his waist and stole the other mug, bold and unrepentant, and pretended the burn didn't catch him on the first swallow. "Steady," Colby murmured. Ford bumped their hips together gently. "We," he said. The final image wasn't meant for anyone else. Hoodie sleeves rolled, pencils upright, string-like memory echoing in the way the desk lamp made gold out of dust. Honey wafers on the windowsill, 2 mugs side by side. A laugh, a kiss, a future practical and romantic in equal measure. Outside, the ginkgo lifted its small fans in the light. Inside, 2 boys wrote their names, not on a roster or a poster or a grade sheet, but on a day that would hold them without demand. And when the air moved, it carried the truth like scent, that what you study long enough becomes a language, and what you love long enough becomes home. Thank you for listening to MangaLove Storytelling. If you find the story meaningful and enjoyable, please remember to give MangaLove a like and subscribe so you won't miss the newest stories. Wishing you a wonderful day.